The blood on her hands was not her own, and if anyone in Rawlins discovered whose it belonged to, Natalie Vance would hang before sunset. She stumbled into the dusty Wyoming town on foot in the late afternoon of August 1877, her dress torn at the hem, her auburn hair escaping its pins in wild tangles that caught the relentless summer wind. The weight of what she had done pressed against her ribs with every labored breath, and she knew with absolute certainty that Colonel Mason's men would not stop hunting until they found her. Her eyes scanned the weathered storefronts and saloons lining the main street, searching desperately for somewhere to hide, somewhere to think, somewhere to become invisible before the riders she knew were coming caught up to her trail. Yates Emmett was shoeing a horse outside the livery stable when he first saw her, and something in the way she moved, furtive and frightened like a rabbit sensing the hawk's shadow, made him set down his hammer and straighten to his full height. He was 26 years old, lean and strong from years of working cattle and breaking horses, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that missed very little. The woman crossing the street toward the general store was young, maybe 22 or 23, and beautiful in a way that would have turned heads even without the obvious terror etched into every line of her body. But it was the terror that caught his attention and held it, because Yates had seen that particular brand of fear before, the kind that came from being hunted by men who meant to kill you. She disappeared into Henderson's general store, and Yates found himself following, telling himself it was none of his business even as his boots carried him across the rutted dirt street. The store smelled of coffee beans and leather, and the sawdust scattered across the wooden floor. Natalie stood at the counter, her back rigid, speaking in low tones to old man Henderson about needing supplies for travel. Her voice shook, despite her obvious efforts to control it. "Heading west, are you?" Henderson asked, squinting at her with the casual curiosity of a man who had lived in Rollins for 30 years and knew everyone's business. "Yes," Natalie said quickly. "My husband is meeting me in Rock Springs. I just need enough provisions to get there." The lie was transparent to Yates, who had positioned himself near the shelves of canned goods where he could watch without being obvious. There was no husband. The woman wore no ring, and more tellingly, she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting the devil himself to walk through it at any moment. Her hands trembled as she counted out coins onto the counter, and Yates noticed the dried blood under her fingernails that she had not managed to scrub away. "Rock Springs is a good day's ride," Henderson was saying. "You got a horse, a wagon." The color drained from Natalie's face. "I will arrange for transportation. Just the supplies, please." Yates stepped forward before he could reconsider the wisdom of getting involved. "She is traveling with me, Henderson. Put her supplies on my account." Both Natalie and Henderson turned to stare at him. The shopkeeper's bushy eyebrows rose toward his hairline, while the woman's green eyes went wide with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope that told Yates everything he needed to know about how badly she needed help. "That's so," Henderson said slowly. "Did not know you were taking on traveling companions, Yates." "Last-minute arrangement," Yates said easily, moving to stand beside Natalie. Up close, he could see the exhaustion bruising the delicate skin beneath her eyes, the way her whole body was strung tight as fence wire. "Family friend. Said I would see her safely to her destination." Natalie opened her mouth, clearly torn between accepting this unexpected salvation and the fear of trusting a complete stranger. Yates met her eyes steadily, trying to communicate without words that whatever she was running from, he was not part of it. Something in his gaze must have convinced her, because she closed her mouth and gave a small nod. "That is very kind of you," she said softly. her voice carrying the educated accent of someone who had not grown up in frontier towns. Henderson shrugged and began gathering the supplies she had requested, along with a few additions that Yates pointed out would be necessary for the trail. While the shopkeeper worked, Yates leaned slightly toward Natalie and spoke in a voice too low for Henderson to hear. "When we leave here, do not say anything. Just follow my lead. I have a room at the boarding house where you can clean up and rest. We will talk there." "Why are you helping me?" Natalie whispered, her eyes searching his face for deception or ulterior motive. "Because you look like you need help," Yates said simply. "And because I know what it is like to be hunted." Her breath caught, and for a moment he thought she might cry, but she mastered herself with visible effort and nodded again. They completed the transaction with Henderson watching them with open curiosity that would definitely fuel gossip by dinner time, but that could not be helped. Yates gathered the supplies and guided Natalie out of the store with a hand hovering near, but not touching the small of her back. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Carmichael, who asked no questions when Yates explained that his cousin had arrived unexpectedly and needed a room. He paid for a week in advance, knowing that Mrs. Carmichael's discretion was directly proportional to the amount of money she received. Once Natalie was safely behind the locked door of the small but clean room, Yates fetched water for washing and stood guard in the hallway while she cleaned herself up. 20 minutes later, she emerged looking slightly more composed but no less frightened. Yates led her to his own room down the hall, checked that no one was listening and closed the door, leaving it open a crack for propriety's sake. "My name is Yates Emmett," he said. "And before you tell me yours, you should know that I am not going to turn you in to whatever law is looking for you, and I am not going to hurt you. But I need to know what kind of trouble is following you, because if men with guns show up in Rawlins asking questions, I need to know whether to lie or to start shooting." Natalie sank onto the single wooden chair in the room, her legs seeming to give out all at once. "My name is Natalie Vance. And the men who are following me work for Colonel Richard Mason. He is not actually military anymore, but everyone still calls him Colonel. He owns a ranch about 50 miles east of here, near the Medicine Bow River." Yates knew the name. Everyone in Wyoming Territory knew Richard Mason, a former Union officer who had come west after the war and built an empire through ruthlessness and intimidation. Men who crossed Mason had a way of disappearing, and the law gave him a wide berth because he had connections that reached all the way to the territorial governor. "What did you do?" Yates asked, keeping his voice neutral, Natalie's hands twisted in her lap. "I killed his son." The words hung in the air between them. Yates studied her face, seeing the guilt and horror there, but also something else: determination, defiance, the look of someone who had committed an act of violence not out of malice but out of necessity. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. The story came out in fits and starts, Natalie's voice breaking occasionally as she relived the horror of 3 nights ago. She had been working as a governess for a rancher family near Mason's property, teaching their 3 daughters. Matthew Mason, the colonel's only son, had taken an interest in her, the kind of interest that felt like oil spreading across water, impossible to escape. He had cornered her in the barn where she sometimes went to read in the evenings when the children were asleep. He had been drinking. He had not listened when she said no. "There was a pitchfork leaning against the stall," Natalie said, her voice hollow. "I grabbed it without thinking. He came at me and I pushed him away with it. I did not mean to. I swear I did not mean to kill him, but the tines went into his chest and he fell backward, and there was so much blood." Her whole body was shaking now. Yates wanted to put a hand on her shoulder in comfort, but knew the last thing she needed right now was a man touching her. You defended yourself, he said firmly. That is not murder. Tell that to Colonel Mason, Natalie said bitterly. Matthew was his pride and joy, the heir to his empire. The colonel does not care that his son was a monster. He only cares that someone took what belonged to him. I ran that night, did not even go back to the house for my things. I have been traveling on foot ever since, hiding during the day, walking at night. But his men are tracking me. They have horses and dogs. They will find me eventually. Yates processed this information, his mind already working through the problem. Did anyone see what happened? No. The ranch hands were all in the bunkhouse. The family was in the main house. It was late after dark. But they will have found Matthew's body by now, and everyone knew he had been pursuing me. I am the obvious suspect. Then we need to get you somewhere safe, Yates said. Somewhere Mason cannot reach you. There is nowhere in Wyoming he cannot reach, Natalie said hopelessly. He owns judges, sheriffs, politicians. Even if I could prove Matthew attacked me, no court would take my word over the colonel's reputation for his son. She was right, and they both knew it. This was 1877 in Wyoming territory, where justice was often more about power than truth, and Mason had more power than anyone. But Yates Emmett had not survived 6 years of working cattle drives, fighting off rustlers, and navigating the dangerous politics of frontier towns without learning a few things about how to disappear when necessary. I know some people, he said slowly. Good people who do not bow to men like Mason. We can get you out of Wyoming entirely if needed. But first, we need to buy some time and make sure Mason's men do not pick up your trail here in Rawlins. Why would you do this? Natalie asked, looking up at him with those haunted green eyes. You do not know me. This is not your fight. Yates thought about the answer to that question. He could have said it was because he believed in helping people in trouble, or because he hated bullies like Mason, or because he had a strong sense of justice. All of those things were true. But the real reason, the one he was only beginning to acknowledge to himself, was standing in front of him with blood under her fingernails and terror in her eyes. And he knew with absolute certainty that he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Because it is the right thing to do, he said simply. Now, you need to rest. I am going to make some arrangements. Do not leave this room for any reason. If someone knocks, do not answer unless they say the phrase, "The horses are ready." That will be me. Natalie nodded, exhaustion clearly winning out over fear now that she had someone to share the burden with. Yates left her there, locking the door from the outside with the spare key Mrs. Carmichael had given him, and went to find his friend Jack Brennan. Jack ran the telegraph office and had his finger on the pulse of every piece of news that came through Rollins. He was also one of the few people Yates trusted completely. They had served together as drovers on a cattle drive to Kansas 5 years ago, and Jack had saved Yates's life when a stampede had thrown him from his horse and nearly trampled him to death. The telegraph office was empty when Yates arrived, the afternoon heat keeping most people indoors. Jack looked up from the paperwork spread across his desk and grinned. "Yates, what brings you by? Need information," Yates said, closing the door behind him. "Has anything come through about trouble at the Mason Ranch?" Jack's grin faded. "Funny you should ask. Got a wire this morning from Fort Steele. Colonel Mason is offering a reward for information leading to the capture of a woman named Natalie Vance. Says she murdered his son. $500. $500 was enough money to make even honest men consider turning someone in." Yates felt his jaw tighten. "What else? Says she is dangerous, armed, probably traveling west toward Utah or south toward Colorado. Mason's got men riding in every direction looking for her. He wants her alive so she can stand trial." Jack paused, his sharp eyes studying Yates's face. But everyone knows Mason's idea of a trial is a rope and a tree. Why are you asking? Yates made a decision. She is here in Rawlins, staying at the boarding house. Jack's eyebrows shot up. You brought her here, found her, more like, and before you ask, I believe her story. Mason's son attacked her, she defended herself. Now Mason wants revenge dressed up as justice. Jack leaned back in his chair, whistling low. That is a hell of a situation, friend. Mason's men are going to come through here sooner or later asking questions. I know. That is why I need your help. If anyone wires asking about a woman matching her description, you did not see anything. Can you do that? Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I owe you my life, Yates. If you say she deserves protecting, then I believe you, but you need to get her out of Rollins fast. Every hour she stays here increases the chance someone will recognize her from the description and decide that $500 is worth more than loyalty to you. I am working on it. I need to get her new clothes, traveling supplies, make her look different. And I need to figure out where to take her that Mason cannot follow. California, Jack said immediately. Get her to California. Mason's reach ends at the territorial border. Once she is in California, she can start a new life, new name, new everything. No one will know to look for her there. It was a good plan, but California was more than 800 miles away across some of the most unforgiving terrain in the West. It would take weeks of hard travel, and every mile would be a risk. I will need supplies for a long journey, Yates said. And I cannot buy them all at once without raising suspicions. Use different stores, Jack suggested. Buy a little here, a little there. Pay cash, do not explain yourself, and leave at night when fewer people will see which direction you are heading. They talked through the details for another hour, Jack using his knowledge of the territory to map out the safest route west. By the time Yates left the telegraph office, he had a plan, but the knot of worry in his gut had only tightened. Getting Natalie to California would be dangerous under the best circumstances. Doing it while being hunted by Mason's men made it nearly suicidal. But when he returned to the boarding house and found Natalie sitting by the window, staring out at the dusty street with an expression of bleak acceptance, he knew he was going to do it anyway. Over the next 2 days, Yates gathered supplies, carefully spacing out his purchases and paying in cash to avoid leaving a trail. He bought trail clothes for Natalie, simple, durable garments that would hold up to weeks of hard riding. He purchased ammunition, dried food, blankets, and medical supplies. He checked on his 2 horses, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper and a gray mare named Silver, making sure they were well fed and ready for a long journey. Natalie stayed hidden in the boarding house, leaving her room only to use the washroom at the end of the hall when she was sure no one else was around. Yates brought her meals and spent the evenings with her, partly to keep her spirits up and partly because he found himself drawn to her company in ways that surprised him. She was educated, well-read, with a quick wit that surfaced whenever her fear receded enough to let her personality show through. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, the daughter of a schoolteacher father and a mother who had died when Natalie was 12. She had come west 2 years ago after her father passed away, looking for adventure and independence, taking the position as a governess because it was one of the few respectable jobs available to unmarried women on the frontier. I thought the West would be different, she said one evening as they sat in her room, Yates in the chair and Natalie perched on the edge of the narrow bed. I thought women had more freedom here, more opportunities, and in some ways that is true. But in others, we are just as trapped by men's expectations and men's violence as we ever were back east. Not all men are like Matthew Mason, Yates said quietly. "I know," Natalie said, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You have proven that. I do not know how I will ever repay you for what you are doing." "You do not owe me anything," Yates said. "I am doing this because it is right, not because I expect payment." But even as he said it, he knew it was not entirely true. He was doing this because somewhere in the last 2 days, Natalie Vance had stopped being a stranger in trouble and had become someone he cared about deeply. Someone whose smile made his heart beat faster and whose fear made him want to ride back to Mason's ranch and put a bullet in the colonel himself. On the third morning, Jack came to the boarding house with urgent news. Mason's men had been spotted in the town of Medicine Bow, about 60 miles northeast of Rawlins, questioning everyone they met about a woman traveling alone. They would reach Rollins within 2 days, maybe less. "You need to leave tonight," Jack said. "I will spread a rumor that I saw a woman matching her description getting on the stage heading south toward Fort Collins. That might send them in the wrong direction, buy you a few more days." Yates clasped his friend's hand in gratitude. "Thank you, Jack, for everything. Just get her out safely," Jack said. "And maybe someday when this has all blown over, send word that you are both all right." That night, under the cover of darkness, Yates and Natalie slipped out of Rawlins. Natalie wore the trail clothes Yates had bought, her distinctive auburn hair hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. She sat astride Silver with the ease of someone who had grown up riding, which was a relief, because they would be spending long hours in the saddle every day. They rode west following the Union Pacific Railroad tracks for the first few hours, then veered south into rougher country where they would be harder to track. The August night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. Neither of them spoke much, both too focused on putting distance between themselves and the danger they knew was coming. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles. Yates found a sheltered spot in a narrow canyon where they could rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. He showed Natalie how to build a small, smokeless fire for coffee, the kind that would not give away their position to anyone searching. "How do you know all this?" Natalie asked as she watched him work. "The tracking, the hiding, all these survival skills. Learned it growing up," Yates said. "My father was a mountain man before he settled down and married my mother. He taught me everything about living off the land, reading signs, staying invisible when you need to. Came in handy over the years." "Where is your family now?" "Gone," Yates said quietly. "Father died of fever when I was 16. Mother followed him a year later. I think her heart just gave out from missing him. They were devoted to each other in a way I have not seen many other couples match." Natalie was silent for a moment. That must have been hard, losing them both so young. "It was, but it also taught me to value the people who matter while they are still here. Life is too short and too uncertain out here to waste time on regrets." He handed her a cup of coffee, and their fingers brushed as she took it. The contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with the caffeine. Natalie felt it too. He could see it in the way her eyes widened slightly, the faint flush that rose in her cheeks. "We should get some rest," Yates said, his voice rougher than intended. "I will take first watch." "You sleep." Natalie nodded and settled onto her bedroll, but Yates noticed she kept her eyes on him for a long time before exhaustion finally claimed her. As he sat watching the horizon and listening for sounds of pursuit, he wondered what he was getting himself into. This was supposed to be about protection, about helping someone in need. But the feelings growing inside him were becoming harder to ignore, and he suspected Natalie was fighting the same battle. They traveled that way for a week, riding hard during the cooler hours of morning and evening, resting during the heat of midday and the darkest part of night. Slowly, The landscape changed from the grasslands of Wyoming to the more rugged terrain of western Colorado. They passed through small settlements where Yates bought supplies with cash and asked no questions, and they carefully avoided larger towns where Mason's reward notices might have reached. During the long hours on the trail, they talked. Natalie told him about the books she loved, the dreams she had once had of traveling to Europe and seeing the great cities of the world. Yates shared stories of cattle drives and the characters he had met over the years, men and women who had carved lives out of this harsh land through sheer determination and grit. The more time they spent together, the more the walls between them came down. Natalie's nightmares lessened, though she still sometimes woke in the dark hours gasping from dreams of blood and violence. When that happened, Yates would talk to her softly until she calmed, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her memories. One evening, as they made camp beside a mountain stream, Natalie asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. "When we get to California, what will you do? Will you go back to Wyoming?" Yates had been thinking about that same question. "I do not know," he admitted. "I do not have much tying me to Wyoming except work, and I can find that anywhere. But I will not leave you alone until I know you are safe and settled." "And then," Natalie pressed. Yates met her eyes across the fire. "And then I suppose that depends on whether you want me to stay or go." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Natalie looked away first, but not before he saw the mixture of hope and fear in her expression. "I do not want to be your obligation," she said quietly. "You have already risked so much for me." "You are not an obligation," Yates said firmly. He stood and moved around the fire to crouch beside her. "Natalie, I need you to understand something. What started as me helping someone in trouble has become something more. I care about you. Not because I feel I have to, but because I want to. Because you are brave and smart and kind, and I have never met anyone quite like you." Natalie's breath caught. "Yates, I do not know if I can, after what happened with Matthew. The thought of any man touching me makes my skin crawl." "I am not asking you for anything," Yates said gently. "I am just telling you the truth. And I want you to know that if and when you are ever ready for more than friendship, I will be here. But if you are never ready, if all you ever want from me is protection and companionship, that is all right too. I am not Matthew Mason. I will never pressure you or expect anything from you." Tears spilled down Natalie's cheeks. "How can you be so patient, so understanding?" "Because you deserve that," Yates said simply. "And because anything worth having is worth waiting for." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he gently wiped the tears from her face with his thumb. Natalie leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Not of you, but of what I feel when I am with you. It is too much, too fast. What if it is just gratitude? What if once we reach safety and the danger is past, these feelings fade?" "Then they fade," Yates said. "But I do not think they will. I think what we have is real, Natalie. I think we are building something that can last. But we do not have to rush. We have time." That night, for the first time since they had left Rawlins, Natalie slept without nightmares. And Yates, keeping watch as he always did, allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they would both find a way through this darkness into light. The trouble found them in a town called Glenwood Springs, nestled in the Colorado mountains where hot springs bubbled up from the earth, and the air smelled of sulfur and pine. They had been on the trail for nearly 3 weeks, and Yates had decided to risk staying in an actual hotel for a night, so Natalie could have a proper bath and a real bed. It was a mistake. They had been in the hotel for less than 2 hours when Yates noticed the 3 men watching them from across the hotel restaurant. They were not local. That much was obvious from their clothes and the way they carried themselves. and they were paying far too much attention to Natalie, their eyes tracking her every movement. Yates caught Natalie's eye and gave a subtle nod toward the door. She understood immediately and excused herself, heading upstairs to their rooms. Yates followed a few minutes later, his hand resting casually on the grip of the revolver at his hip. In the hallway outside their rooms, he found Natalie waiting, her face pale. "They are Mason's men, are they not?" she said. "Maybe. Or maybe just bounty hunters who saw the reward notice. Either way, we need to leave now." They gathered their belongings quickly, Yates's mind racing through options. The hotel had a back staircase that led to the alley behind the building. If they could reach the livery stable where Copper and Silver were stabled, they might be able to ride out before the men realized they were gone. But as they descended the back stairs, Yates heard voices below. 2 men, by the sound of it, blocking the exit. The third would still be watching the front. They were trapped. "Back up," Yates whispered. "There is another way." They climbed back to the second floor, and Yates led Natalie to the window at the end of the hall. It overlooked the alley, but there was a porch roof below that they could drop onto and from there reach the ground. "Can you climb down?" he asked. Natalie looked at the drop and nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Yes." Yates went first, dropping onto the porch roof and then reaching up to help Natalie down. The old wood creaked under their weight, and for a heart-stopping moment, Yates thought it would collapse, but it held. They scrambled to the edge and jumped the remaining distance to the ground. Behind them, a shout went up. They had been spotted. "Run," Yates said, grabbing Natalie's hand. They sprinted through the alley toward the livery stable, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Yates could hear boots pounding on the dirt, the shouts of men coordinating their chase. His heart hammered in his chest, not from exertion but from the fear of what would happen if they were caught. The livery was mercifully close. Yates burst through the doors, startling the young man mucking out stalls. "Need our horses now," Yates barked, tossing the man a gold coin that was worth 3 times the boarding fee. The stable hand did not ask questions, just moved quickly to saddle Copper and Silver. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. Yates kept one hand on his gun, ready to fight if it came to that, but hoping desperately that it would not. "Almost ready," the stable hand said, cinching the last strap. The livery doors burst open. 3 men stood silhouetted against the afternoon sun, all of them armed. The one in the center, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek, smiled coldly. "Natalie Vance," he said. "Colonel Mason has been looking for you. You have led us on quite a chase." "She is not going anywhere with you," Yates said, stepping between Natalie and the men. The scarred man's eyes shifted to Yates, assessing him. "This is not your concern, Cowboy. We are just here for the woman. You can walk away from this." "Not happening," Yates said flatly. "Your funeral," the man said and went for his gun. Yates was faster. His revolver cleared leather in a smooth motion, and he fired before the other man's gun was fully drawn. The shot took the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering to the floor. The other 2 men froze, their hands hovering over their own guns. "Next man who moves gets one in the chest," Yates said, his voice cold as January ice. "You tell Colonel Mason that Natalie Vance is under my protection now. He wants her. He will have to go through me. And trust me, that is not a fight he will win." The wounded man clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "You just signed your death warrant," he gasped. "Maybe," Yates said, "but you are the ones bleeding. Now get out." The 3 men retreated, the wounded one supported by his companions. As soon as they were gone, Yates turned to Natalie, who was standing white-faced but composed beside the horses. "We need to ride, hard and fast. They will come back with reinforcements." They mounted and spurred the horses into a gallop, racing out of Glenwood Springs as if the hounds of hell were on their heels. Maybe they were. Yates knew that shooting one of Mason's men had escalated the situation beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. The colonel would not rest now until both he and Natalie were dead. They rode through the night, pushing the horses to their limits and beyond. By dawn, they had climbed high into the mountains, following narrow trails that twisted through pine forests and past streams swollen with snowmelt. The air grew thin and cold, and Natalie shivered despite the heavy coat Yates had insisted she wear. Finally, when both horses and riders were on the verge of collapse, Yates found a small cave hidden behind a curtain of vegetation. It was dry and defensible, with a narrow entrance that would force any attackers to come at them one at a time. Inside, Natalie collapsed onto the rocky floor, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and reaction. Yates built a small fire for warmth, then sat beside her, his arm going around her shoulders without thought. "You could have let them take me," Natalie said, her voice muffled against his chest. "You could have walked away like that man said. Now Mason will hunt you too." "I told you before," Yates said. "You are not an obligation. I shot that man because I would rather die than let anyone hurt you. Do you understand that, Natalie? You matter to me more than my own safety." She pulled back enough to look up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Why?" "We have only known each other for a few weeks. How can you feel so strongly about me?" "I do not know," Yates admitted. "Maybe it is just chemistry or fate or whatever you want to call it. But from the moment I saw you walking into that general store, terrified and alone, something inside me knew you were important. Every day since then has only confirmed it. I am falling in love with you, Natalie. Maybe I already have fallen. And I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are insane, but there it is. The truth." Natalie stared at him for a long moment, and Yates braced himself for rejection, for her to tell him that his feelings were one-sided, born of proximity and danger rather than genuine connection. But instead, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me because I swore after Matthew that I would never trust another man again, but you are nothing like him. You are kind and brave and honorable, and you make me feel safe in a way I have not felt since my father was alive. I do not know what we are going to do or how this story ends, but I know I do not want to face it without you." Yates felt something crack open inside his chest, something warm and fierce and overwhelming. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and when she did not, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, a soft press of lips that asked permission rather than demanded. Natalie made a small sound in her throat and pressed closer, her hands sliding into his hair. The kiss deepened, became something more urgent, and Yates felt years of loneliness and wandering fall away, replaced by the certainty that he had found the person he was meant to be with. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Natalie's eyes were bright with tears. "I was afraid I would never be able to do that again," she said. "That Matthew had broken something in me permanently, but with you it is different. With you I want more." "We have time," Yates said, though his body was screaming the opposite. "We do not have to rush anything." "I know," Natalie said, "but I also know that every day we have together is a gift that could be taken away at any moment. I do not want to waste that time being afraid of my own feelings." They stayed in the cave for 2 days, resting and planning their next move. Yates knew they could not keep running forever. Eventually, they would run out of money or supplies or luck, and Mason's men would catch up. They needed a permanent solution, a way to end the threat rather than just evade it. On the morning of the 3rd day, an idea began to form. It was risky, maybe suicidal, but it might be their only chance at a real future together. "What if we go to the authorities?" Yates said as they broke camp. "Not in Wyoming, where Mason owns everyone, but in California. We tell them the truth about what happened, get your story on record. It would not be enough to arrest Mason, but it would create a paper trail, documentation that you acted in self-defense. If anything happens to you after that, Mason would be the obvious suspect. It might be enough to make him back off." Natalie considered this. "It could work, but it also means exposing myself, making my location known. If the authorities do not believe me, I could end up in jail or worse." "That is true," Yates admitted. "But the alternative is spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never settling down, never being able to use your real name. Is that really the life you want?" "No," Natalie said quietly. "I want a real life, with you if you will have me." "Always," Yates said. They rode west with renewed purpose, pushing hard to reach the California border before Mason's men could catch up again. The mountains gradually gave way to high desert, then to the agricultural valleys of California's interior. It was October now, the brutal summer heat replaced by mild autumn temperatures that made travel easier. They reached Sacramento in mid-October, dusty and exhausted but alive. The city was booming with railroad money and gold rush dreams, big enough that two more strangers would not attract attention. Yates found them a modest hotel and a lawyer who specialized in women's rights, a rarity in 1877 but not unheard of in progressive California. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Chen, listened to Natalie's story with careful attention, taking notes and asking pointed questions. When Natalie finished, Mrs. Chen sat back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "This is a difficult case," she said bluntly. "Not because I do not believe you, but because proving self-defense after the fact is nearly impossible, especially when the man you killed came from a powerful family. However, you have several things working in your favor. First, you came forward voluntarily rather than waiting to be caught. Second, you have a witness," she nodded at Yates, "who can testify to your state of mind and the threats you faced. Third, California has no love for Wyoming territorial politics and would be disinclined to extradite someone based solely on the word of a man like Colonel Mason. So what do we do?" Natalie asked. "We make a formal statement to the police here in Sacramento," Mrs. Chen said. "We present your version of events and request protection from retaliation. We also send a letter to the territorial governor in Wyoming, putting him on notice that any attempt to pursue you for defending yourself from sexual assault will be met with legal resistance and press attention. The threat of scandal may be enough to make Mason think twice." It was not a perfect solution, but it was something. Over the next week, Mrs. Chen guided them through the process, helping Natalie craft a statement that was both truthful and legally sound. The Sacramento police were skeptical but ultimately agreed to file the report, especially after Mrs. Chen made it clear that she would go to the newspapers if they refused. The letter to the Wyoming governor was sent by registered mail, copies provided to 3 different newspapers for insurance. In it, Mrs. Chen laid out the facts of the case and made it clear that Natalie Vance was now under California's protection, and any attempt at extralegal justice would be viewed as kidnapping and murder. "It is done," Mrs. Chen said after the last document was filed. "You are as safe as I can make you, which is not the same as being completely safe. Colonel Mason may still come after you, but he will have to think carefully about the consequences now." "Thank you," Natalie said, shaking the lawyer's hand. "I cannot express how grateful I am." "Thank me by living a good life," Mrs. Chen said. Too many women are silenced by fear and shame after experiencing what you did. By speaking up, you have done something brave. Do not let that courage go to waste. In the days that followed, Yates and Natalie began building the life they had only dared to dream about during their desperate flight west. They found a small house to rent on the outskirts of Sacramento, close enough to the city for work but far enough out for privacy and peace. Yates took a job at a local ranch, his years of experience making him a valuable hire, while Natalie began teaching at a private school for girls, using her education and love of learning to shape young minds. But even as they built their new life, the shadow of Colonel Mason hung over them. Yates took precautions, varying his route home from work, keeping his gun close at hand, making sure someone always knew where they were. Natalie jumped at unexpected noises and scanned every crowd for unfamiliar faces. The answer came 3 months after they arrived in Sacramento, in the form of a telegram delivered to their door. Yates opened it with dread, expecting threats or demands. Instead, he found news he had never anticipated. "Colonel Richard Mason died yesterday of heart failure," he read aloud. "His estate is in chaos, and his men have scattered to find new employment. No further pursuit of the Natalie Vance matter is expected." Natalie sat down heavily on the nearest chair. "He is dead, just like that, apparently," Yates said, reading the rest of the telegram. It was from Jack Brennan, who had been keeping tabs on the situation in Wyoming. "Jack says the colonel had been in poor health for months, ever since his son died. The stress of the manhunt combined with grief just wore him down. He died in his sleep." Natalie covered her face with her hands, and for a moment, Yates thought she was crying. Then he realized her shoulders were shaking with laughter, the slightly hysterical laughter of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight and suddenly found it lifted. "We are free," she said, looking up at him with wonder. "Actually, truly free. No more running, no more looking over our shoulders. It is really over." Yates pulled her into his arms, feeling the same giddy relief flooding through him. They had survived. Against all odds, despite impossible circumstances, they had made it through to the other side. That night, they celebrated their freedom in the privacy of their small house. What had started as gentle exploration in the cave months ago now deepened into something more, a physical expression of the love and trust they had built through shared danger and mutual support. Yates was careful and patient, letting Natalie set the pace, and when they finally came together, it felt like a healing, the replacing of traumatic memory with tenderness and joy. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Natalie traced patterns on Yates's chest and said the words she had been holding back. "I want to marry you. I want to build a real life together, have a family, grow old with you. Is that foolish? Are we moving too fast?" Yates caught her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing her fingers one by one. "Nothing about what we have been through has been normal or conventional. We have compressed a lifetime of experiences into a few months. So no, I do not think we are moving too fast. I think we are exactly where we are supposed to be. And yes, I want to marry you. I want everything with you." They married in December of 1877, a small ceremony with just a handful of friends including Jack Brennan, who traveled all the way from Wyoming to stand up for Yates. Mrs. Chen attended as well, bringing champagne and a set of law books as a wedding gift, which made Natalie laugh until she cried. The years that followed were not always easy. Frontier life rarely was. There were hard winters and droughts, financial struggles and moments of doubt. But through it all, Yates and Natalie faced everything together, their bond forged in fire and tempered by trust proving stronger than any challenge they encountered. In the spring of 1879, Natalie gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Samuel after Yates's father. He had his mother's green eyes and his father's stubborn determination, and from the moment he entered the world screaming his outrage at the cold and the light, Yates knew his heart would never be entirely his own again. 2 years later, a daughter followed, red-haired like her mother and fierce from birth. They named her Rose, and she grew up wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding horses almost before she could walk. Yates bought his own ranch in 1882, a modest spread in the California hills where they raised cattle and horses. Natalie continued teaching, though now she did it from their home, tutoring the children of neighboring ranchers and farmers who valued education for their sons and daughters equally. On summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were in bed, Yates and Natalie would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked about the past, remembering the fear and the danger that had brought them together. But mostly they talked about the future, about the children they were raising and the life they were building, about dreams both realized and still reaching for. "You ever regret it?" Natalie asked one evening, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "Helping me that day in Rawlins. You could have had a simpler life, fewer complications." Yates was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously because that was what Natalie deserved. Then he turned and tilted her face up to his, looking into those green eyes that had first captured him in a dusty general store so long ago. "Not for a single second," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Natalie. You and our children and this life we built together. If I could go back and do it all over again, knowing everything we would face, I would make the same choice every time, because you were worth fighting for. You still are." Natalie kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Yates Emmett. I have loved you since the moment you stood between me and those men in Glenwood Springs, ready to die to keep me safe. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Yates said. "My fierce, brave, beautiful wife. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me into your heart." The years continued to unfold, bringing more children, 2 more sons and another daughter, filling their house with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large family. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books as much as his mother did, while Rose became a skilled horsewoman who could outride most of the cowboys in the valley. The younger children each found their own paths, shaped by parents who valued both education and hard work, independence and compassion. Yates taught his sons to be gentle with women, to respect boundaries and understand that strength was not measured in violence but in restraint and honor. Natalie taught her daughters that they were not property or prizes, that they had value beyond their appearance or their ability to please men, that their voices and their choices mattered. The ranch prospered, growing from a small operation to one of the most successful in the region. Yates developed a reputation for breeding excellent horses, while Natalie's school grew to include nearly 20 students from families across the valley. Together, they became pillars of their community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help neighbors in need. In 1890, when Samuel was 11 and preparing to leave for boarding school back east, he asked his parents to tell him the story of how they met. Yates and Natalie exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in that single look. They had always planned to tell the children the truth when they were old enough to understand, but they had not expected the question quite so soon. They sat down with all 5 children that evening and told them an age-appropriate version of the story, explaining that their mother had been in danger, and their father had helped her escape from bad men who wanted to hurt her. They emphasized the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous, and of never turning away from someone who needed help. Rose, 9 years old and already showing signs of the fierce spirit she would carry into adulthood, looked at her father with shining eyes and said, "You were a hero, Papa." Yates shook his head. "No, sweetheart, I was just a man who did what needed to be done. Your mother is the real hero. She survived something terrible and found the courage to keep going, to build a new life, to love again even when she had every reason to be afraid. That takes more strength than anything I did." Natalie reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together the way they had 1,000 times before. "We were heroes together," she said. "We saved each other." And that, Yates thought, was the truest thing either of them had ever said. The children grew and eventually left home, creating their own lives and their own stories. Samuel became a lawyer in San Francisco, using his education and his parents' lessons about justice to fight for the rights of workers and immigrants. Rose married a rancher and raised her own children on the land she loved, passing down the skills her father had taught her. The younger children scattered across the West, but they all stayed close, drawn back regularly to the ranch where they had been raised and the parents who had loved them so fiercely. Yates and Natalie grew old together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of laughter and hard work, and the challenges of life well lived. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1917, surrounded by children and grandchildren, the house overflowing with family and love. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Yates and Natalie sat on the porch as they had countless times before, wrapped in blankets against the cool autumn air. Natalie's head rested on Yates's shoulder, and his arm held her close, their bodies fitting together with the ease of 40 years of practice. "You remember that first night in Rawlins?" Natalie asked softly. "When you locked me in that boarding house room and told me not to answer the door for anyone. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Yates said, "and the most terrified. I wanted to protect you from everything bad in the world." "You did," Natalie said. "You gave me back my life, Yates. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never trust again, and a family I never dreamed I could have. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Yates said, his voice rough with emotion. "Purpose, belonging, love. Before you, I was just drifting through life, taking work where I could find it, never putting down roots. You made me want to build something permanent, something that would last beyond our own lives." "We did that," Natalie said, looking out at the ranch they had built together, the land they had shaped and nurtured, the legacy they were leaving behind. "All of this, the children, the grandchildren, the life we built, it all started with you being brave enough to help a stranger." "No," Yates corrected gently. "It started with you being brave enough to accept help. A lot of people in your situation would have been too proud or too afraid to trust. But you took a chance on me, on us. That took real courage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the horses stirring in the barn, the wind moving through the grass, the distant call of a coyote. It was the sound of home, of safety, of peace earned through struggle and held precious because of it. "I love you," Natalie said, the same words she had spoken countless times over 4 decades, but they never lost their power or their meaning. "I love you too," Yates replied. "Always have, always will." They went inside eventually, banking the fire and checking the locks more from habit than necessity these days. In their bedroom, the same one they had shared for 35 years, they prepared for sleep with the comfortable efficiency of long partnership. And when they finally lay down together in the darkness, Natalie curled into Yates's side exactly as she had on their wedding night and every night since. "Thank you," she whispered, though Yates was not sure if she was talking to him or to fate or to whatever force in the universe had brought them together all those years ago in Rawlins, Wyoming. "Thank you," he whispered back, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The years continued their steady march, bringing the inevitable changes that time brings to all lives. Yates and Natalie celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1927, though the party was smaller and quieter than the 40th had been. Some of their friends had passed on, and their own energy was not what it once had been. But the love remained as strong as ever, perhaps even stronger for having weathered so many seasons together. They were grandparents many times over now, with great-grandchildren beginning to appear as the family tree spread and branched. Every child and grandchild knew the story of how Grandma and Grandpa met, how Grandpa had saved Grandma from bad men, and they had fallen in love while traveling across the West. The story had taken on mythic proportions over the years, growing in the telling until it was part of family legend, a tale of courage and romance that would be passed down for generations. Yates passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1929, at the age of 78. It was peaceful and painless, exactly the way he would have wanted to go. He simply lay down one night beside the woman he had loved for more than 50 years, and did not wake up the next morning. Natalie held his hand as the sun rose, tears streaming down her weathered face, but she did not rail against his passing. They had been blessed with more time together than many couples received, and she was grateful for every moment. She followed him less than a year later, her heart simply giving out one afternoon as she sat on the porch watching the sunset. The doctor said it was congestive heart failure, but the family knew better. Natalie had died of a broken heart, unable to continue without the man who had been her partner, her protector, her great love for more than half a century. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a pair of oak trees they had planted in their first year there. The headstone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their births and deaths, along with a single inscription that Samuel had chosen. Together in life, together in death, together forever. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations of Emmets who knew the story of their brave ancestors, and strived to live up to their example. The house was preserved as much as possible, becoming a touchstone for family gatherings and celebrations, a place where the presence of Yates and Natalie could still be felt in every corner and every board. And on summer evenings, when the sun sets over the California hills and paints the sky in shades of gold and crimson, if you stand on the porch of that old ranch house and listen carefully, you might hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of quiet conversation, the sound of two souls who found each other against impossible odds and built a love that transcended time itself. Because some stories do not end with death. Some stories become part of the fabric of a place, woven into the land and the air and the memories of everyone who comes after. The story of Yates Emmett and Natalie Vance is one of those stories. It is a reminder that courage can be found in unexpected places, that love can bloom even in the harshest circumstances, and that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is simply reach out a hand to help someone in need. Their love story began with danger and desperation in a dusty Wyoming town in 1877, but it became something far greater than its turbulent beginning. It became a testament to the power of trust, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of love that is built on mutual respect and shared struggle. It became a foundation upon which an entire family was built, a legacy that would influence generations of Emmets to come, teaching them about honor and compassion, and the importance of standing up for what is right no matter the cost. And perhaps that is the real happy ending. Not just that Yates and Natalie found each other and built a life together, but that their love created ripples that spread outward through time, touching lives they would never meet, inspiring choices they would never witness, creating good in the world long after they themselves had passed from it. In the end, that is what every great love story does. It changes not just the lovers themselves, but everyone and everything they touch, creating a better world simply by existing. And the story of the cowboy who kept a woman's deadly secret and protected her life, who fell in love with her courage and married her strength, who built a ranch and a family and a legacy that lasted long beyond his own years, is exactly that kind of story. It is a story of the Wild West, of danger and romance, of flight and pursuit, of fear overcome and trust earned. But most of all, it is a story of love, pure and simple and enduring, the kind of love that happens once in a lifetime if you are very lucky, the kind of love that changes everything. And that, truly, is where this story ends and all the other stories begin, with love spreading outward like ripples on a pond, touching everything, changing everything, making the world just a little bit better for having existed. Yates and Natalie's love story did not end when they died. It continues still, in every child who bears their name, in every family gathering held at the ranch they built, in every retelling of how they met and fell in love against impossible odds. That is the real magic of a great love story. It never truly ends. It simply becomes part of the larger story of the world, woven into the fabric of time itself, eternal and unchanging, a light in the darkness that never goes out. And as long as there are people who remember, as long as there are descendants who carry their blood and their legacy, as long as there is a ranch in the California hills where two oak trees stand watch over a pair of headstones, the love story of Yates Emmett and Natalie Vance will continue, inspiring, enduring, eternal.